So we have started with this problem and we have entered x plus h for both of our variables. If you see me do something wrong here, you've got to stop me and let me know. Now we also have to subtract f of x. So if I right now just say minus the function 7x squared minus 2x, I just did it wrong because I only subtracted the first part of that function. If you didn't have a parenthesis right there, that's the third time we've practiced that. You got to start catching on. Why do you put parentheses there? Because it's a variable. That's f of x is like y. And remember how I said variables get replaced with an empty parenthesis? Well, f of x is the y variable, so it gets replaced with an empty parenthesis. It keeps you from forgetting to distribute the negative to both parts. Okay, now I'm going to multiply this all out, but I'm going to do this in my head. By now you should know that's x plus h and another x plus h. That's x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. Then it gets times by 7 everywhere. So I'm going to put a 7 in the front, and a 7 times 2 is a 14, and a 7 there. Then I'm going to distribute this out. I'm showing a little less work as you're getting better at this. Minus 2h minus 7x squared plus 2x. Then I can look and see, is there a bunch of canceling? Because pro tip, if stuff doesn't cancel, you probably did it wrong. Not everything needs to cancel, but a lot of stuff needs to cancel, and those all cancel. So then I'm going to bring the h squareds to the front, 7h squared plus 14xh minus 2h. Raise your hand if you passed the careful test. All right. Do you have any questions? Is there any part that you're like, I don't get what happened? Okay. So you've seen what kind of question this is. You can do it yourself. You just start with that, and then you give yourself a function. Okay? It's not that hard to do. You just give yourself a function like, and make sure you got at least an x squared in it, and throw in at least one negative. Like there's one. Try that. Now, how do you know if you got it right? You'd have to have me check it, or have to have a different kid check it, but there's also problems in the homework like that. Alrighty then. Oh, wait, what's the x-intercept? Finish this sentence for me. The x-intercept is where y equals 0. So I put in a 0 right here, and then I think to myself, how the heck do I solve something? Oh, it can be factored. If you can factor it, you should. So you factor out the x, and then you have 7x minus 2 left. That equals 0. That's why that works. So then x equals 0. And I can do it in my head. I think it's 2/7. Can anybody verify 2/7? All right, so x equals 0. Why does that front thing just be 0? Because if you put a 0 here, it will equal 0. That's why it's one of the answers. And the other one is, again, I did a bunch of solving in my head there, 2/7. So those were called the x-intercepts because we set y equal to 0. How about the y-intercept? You take the original function and finish this sentence for me. The y-intercept is where x equals 0. And now I put a 0 here and there, and then that's why y equals 0. X equals 0, y equals 0. Wait a minute. I could have known that because the y-intercept is where x... A 0, 0 has got to be one of the ones for both of them. Does that make sense to you? If it's the x-intercept, 0, 0, it's also the y-intercept. Think about where it is. It's on the y and the x at the same time. All right. So we already knew that, though, because, look, we already knew x equaled 0. All right. So, and the other answer was 2/7 for that. So I better put that in here. That was when the x-intercept was y equals 0. Yep, so 2/7 was the other one. 2/7, comma 0. Okay, we should move on. That is an implied domain question. And right off the bat, my eye gets drawn right here. Can you tell me why my eye should be drawn right there? There's actually 2 reasons. Can you tell me one of them? Ava. Yes, and if there's a square root right away, before you even have to think much, you just take that and you bring it out and you say x plus 5 needs to stay greater than or equal to what? 0. And then there's the issue of, here,
Because say the square root of x plus 5 equals 2.
if this equaled 2, that would be a problem. All right, because then the bottom would be 2 minus 2, which would be 0. So you're saying that the square root of x plus 5 should not equal 2, right? Because if it does, the function crashes. That's two important things. Now put it all together on a number line. And you're going to have to solve both of those things. Let's see if you're up to it. I hope you figured out that this one needed to be squared on both sides. Because why? Because squared undoes square root. Now some people are thinking, oh, does this the absolute value thing? No, that is if you put a square root on both sides. Squaring both sides is easy. And it's just x plus 5 is not equal to 4. And so I'm going to subtract 5. X not equal to negative 1. All right. And if you think about it, like here, if I put in negative 1, look, it doesn't like it, because then it becomes square root of 4, which is 2. And then the denominator is 2 minus 2. Denominator is 0. So, yeah, we can't let it be negative 1. So I'm going to put a negative 1 right here and say, no, it can't be that. All right, what's the other one? Well, minus 5. And x has to be greater than or equal to negative 5. Well, here's where negative 5 would go. Empty spot. Greater than or equal to that. But I already know it can't be negative 1. If you need to make sure you understand it, you can always test negative 1. And you'll see it does not work. And if you don't understand why these are included, like the numbers 0 and 1 and 2, check it. You stick in a 0, and you will see that you end up with... Wait a minute, I'm going to double check that. Actually, it feels like... Yeah, 0 works, and it's supposed to work. Yeah, it's shaded. So I was like, wait a minute, 0 works. It's supposed to work. Okay, so there's your answer, and I would have accepted it also as negative 5 to negative 1, union negative 1 to infinity. Any questions about that complicated domain question? Yes?
So, it can be greater than or equal to negative 5.
You push your name tag over. What?
I think it can be greater than or equal to negative 5 because 0 is possible.
Oh, wait a minute. I graphed it wrong. Thank you. Good catch. Or equal to negative 5. All right, so here, I'll test it. I'm just going to stick negative 5 in. I already know you're right, but I'm just trying to show people. If you're like, not sure, go put negative 5 here and see if you get a problem. Top is fine. The only thing that'd be a problem on the top, well, actually, there's no way to have a problem on the top. It doesn't have a square root. You can't, like, make the top get in trouble. But the bottom has two ways. Square root of 0 is fine. And 2 minus the square root of 0 is just still 2. So, yeah, I put in negative 5. Nothing bad happens. So you're right. Bracket right there. Thank you for catching that. Now I won't make that mistake next hour. Okay. Any other last questions? Yes, you may. Go ahead, McLean. All right. Here's a piecewise. Now, this one is not asking you to graph it. This one is just asking you to find, what's f of 4? And some people are like, well, I guess I got to do it in both of them. No, that'd be wrong. You don't understand it then. Figure out f of 4. I'll pause for a second. And then figure out f of negative 2 and f of 0. I'll pause while you try that one.
16.
How did you pick which one to put it in? Because it's bigger than 0, only that one applies. So now 4 goes in, and I got 4 squared is 16. I agree. Now, if we were to graph this, do you get, when they asked you for f of 4, it would have been saying, go over here where it's 4, and you do an input of 4, and then you try to figure out what would be on the function in that area there where x was 4. And if I actually graph it, I think that'd be good for you too. We'll do that in a second. Let's finish this first. Then f of negative 2. Let's get, no, they already picked on Diego. Matthew, f of negative 2, what'd you get? Which one did you put it in? Why? Because the x is less than 0, that one applied, and you get f of x is like y equals negative 2. All right. How about f of 0, Jaden? And how did you pick which one to put it in? It's the bottom one. Why? Because it says or equal to 0. You are correct. So you'd use the bottom function, which is this one, and you stick the 0 in that, and you get 0. You would have got 0 actually either way, but okay, cool. Now take a second, and there could be a question where we ask you to graph this. I have to say, this is a pretty easy one actually, so I shouldn't need to give you any directions. Just graph it. There's a little graph available for you on the right. Graph it in there. Pausing. Okay, now that should have been enough time for you to finish this. If I just look at this, y equals x, you should know how to graph y equals x. It's a line that goes like that. But why, in this case, is that not right, Sam?
Because it can't, if it's y equals x, it can't be more than 0.
Yeah, x has to stay less than 0. So it's fine to have that on this side, but on the other side, x is bigger than 0, so it doesn't exist over there. All right, and how about at 0? Does this graph own 0? No. So I put an empty spot right there. So let's put an empty green, no blue circle there. Okay, now, Madeline, can you tell me how to do the other part?
You graph the parabola.
There's a parabola. What'd I do wrong? I'll make it red so it's easier to see. What'd I do wrong? Two things, actually.
It has to be greater than 0.
Yep, so this part has to go. Otherwise, it wouldn't have passed the vertical line test. That's a good way to check yours, is look at yours. And if yours doesn't pass the vertical line test, then it's not a function, so it must be wrong. And,
It's equal to 0.
yeah, so this gets the filled in part. You might be like, on a test, if I don't have two different colors, how am I going to know? If you had something like this, I can tell which line owns that. Okay? All right. So now our answers maybe would make more sense in that context. If you're doing f of 4, that's going to be like way up here, because here's where 4 is. F of negative 2, that's going to be down here, and that makes sense, because that's where negative 2 is. And f of 0 was 0, and that made sense too. It's even on the graph. Okay. All right, moving on. Don't graph it. There's not even any graph paper. Find those 4 answers. Pausing for a second while you try that. All right, let's just rapid fire these because that one was 4, so it would be right there. So you'd stick in a 4, you'd get a 4. F of x equaled 4. Okay, now let's just get the answers quick. And it's row 3, person 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you are, Jaden. Can anybody verify 3?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And row 1, person 1. That's only going to happen once out of 36 times. Think about it. 6 times 6, 36 things that can happen. A double 1 only happens once out of 36 times. Go ahead.
49.
49. Can anybody verify 49? Okay, good. And why don't you just read me the last one too, Harley?
9.
And 9.
Negative 3.
Row. Okay, so what did you do? Did you put it in this one?
I honestly don't know.
Okay, all right. Well, let's try to figure it out. So how should you do it? Well, we got to figure out the one that you'd use if y is, oh, you probably stuck it in as x is 9. If y is 9, if you guys didn't catch that, f of x is the y, that's 9. 9 equals x squared if x equals, well, would it ever? Could you find any x values that would stay less than 1 that would make it equal 9? Negative what?
3.
Negative 3 makes it work. Okay, cool. Is there another answer in here that would make it 9? No, because that one's always 3. It says y equals 3. It's never going to be 9. So if this has to be 9, 9 equals 3, never. And then the last one would be 9 equals that if x equals, well, shouldn't that be 9?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is 2 answers.
Yep.
You weren't wrong, but there was another answer. So both answers. And you can't just give one of them. Like, that's going to happen a lot in pre-calc, where you're going to have two answers, and you give one of the two. I can't even give you half credit. Yes?
Did you get the x equals 9?
Okay, x equals 9, because would you agree that this is where the 9 is supposed to go, right here? And 9 will equal, what if x is 9? 9 will equal 9, won't it?
Oh, yes, okay.
As long as this number isn't too big, but it says anything bigger than 2, so
Okay.
that's why.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, this one is a real world problem, but if the real world part freaks you out, then just think of it as, well, there's the function, just like before. It just didn't use f of x, it used s of n. Otherwise, it's just a piecewise function. It's just got context. All right, if I try to figure this one out. Part A, what's the cost to ship 10 comic books? Well, I feel like the 10 is either the s of n or it's the n. And if you look in the problem, you'll be able to figure it out. It tells you right here which one's which. All right, pause, will you try that? So the cost to ship 10 books. It says that n is the number of comic books. So they just told me it's 10. So I'm going to put a 10 for n. So then I got to see, is it in here or is it in here? Well, 10's clearly between 1 and 14, so I got to use this one. That's how you tell which shipping method you use. So now, if n is 10, I put the 10 there. 1.5 times 10 is easy, it's 15. Plus 2.5, 1750. Raise your hand if you had 1750. Okay, good. What's the significance of this formula for n is greater than or equal to 15? What they're trying to say is, why is this n is greater than 15 thing matter in the context of this problem? And what they're saying is, you get free shipping.
On all orders, 15 comic books or more.
15 comic books or more. Very good. That's perfectly said. So they're just asking you to kind of tell, in the context of this question, what does it mean when n is bigger than 15? It means the shipping is 0. Ooh, free shipping. You guys have heard of that before. All right. Work time. Yay. So we have way more than normal amount of work time today. So one of the things that a person could do with this much work time, which is unusual, is you could go back and work on any of those old homework questions that you didn't understand, and you could ask me questions about them. B, because we have so much work time today, you could even have time to take another top 20, even if your last top 20 was like a 17 and you just really want to try for a bigger one, then if you ask, I could reset your top 20 and give you one more try on one of those. I do have one last thing to just remind you about that we didn't talk about in this class. What if I asked you to graph y equals x squared, but it's plus a? Would you just graph y equals x squared? Just graph y equals x squared to start with. Do you know where that thing's going to move? Are you at least smart enough to know that it's going to move up and down? Based on what a is, right? Okay, so then where do you graph this thing? Well, if you don't tell me anything about a, I just graph it right there, and I say, I don't know which way it's going to go, so I just leave it. But they'll always tell you something about a. What if they tell you a is bigger than or equal to 2? Would you agree that this thing just moved up? Yup, because if I put in a 2 there, it just moved up 2. But do you know exactly how far it moved? Would you could agree with the statement it moved up at least 2? So you start there, and you say, I think it moved up 2, so there's my parabola. But could it have also moved up more than that? Then you could either shade it above it, and say the whole thing's going to move up that way, or you could just draw more of them, like it could be here, it could be here, it could be here, and just keep drawing them. That's how you graph something like this. You saw it in your homework. I was just trying to explain that's what they mean. Those can be tricky. And we haven't done like 75 of them, so you know it isn't necessarily a big part of your upcoming test. But I'm warning you, we're going to get more and more into these, so learn how to do that. If you want to see if you actually get what I'm talking about, would you please try to graph square root? You probably should know what that is. And then I'm going to put minus a, and you'd be like, well, then I can't graph it. Well, you can graph it as soon as I tell you that a is going to be less than, yeah, when you put in an a, you're putting in a negative a, less than 4. Well, I was with you until you put in that a thing. Well, that's the pre-calc part. That's just higher algebra. Now we got to figure out, where did the thing move? If it's got to be less than 4, that means they're going to put in like maybe 3, right? Maybe 2. Maybe 1. Maybe 0. Could they even put in negative 1? If they put in negative 1, would that be okay? Yeah, you can do that. Whatever the number 1, it's just going to move to the left. Normally these things move to the right, but all of a sudden, when you're adding 1, it's starting to move to the left. All right, so if you were graphing this one, you should have said, okay, the whole thing, we start with the 4. And I know it can't be 4, but if we started with 4, the whole thing would move to the right 4, and it'd be here. But it can't be exactly there, so you make it a dotted line. And then, what if you put in 3? It'd be here, or here, or here, or here. All right, I messed up on my times. I forgot it was a Wednesday. You did not have lots of extra time. Have a wonderful day. If you want to come in tomorrow for a top 20, you can. No invite needed on a Thursday.